There are heartbreaks. And then there are betrayals that rip the ground right out from under you. Just moments before you're about to say, I do. Marcus Hill was the kind of man everyone thought had it all: a kind heart, a steady career, a beautiful love story, and a diamond ring he'd spent 3 months picking out. And Chloe, she was the one. At least that's what he believed. That morning, the church in Savannah was glowing. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows. Guests had filled the pews. The choir was humming a gentle tune of joy. But just behind a small wooden door, a devastating secret was coming undone. Only minutes before the ceremony, Marcus held a folded letter in his hand, a love note he'd written for Chloe, and walked toward the little room where she was waiting to become his wife. He pushed the door open, but what he saw wasn't a bride fixing her veil, it was the woman he was about to marry, crying in the arms of her therapist. And the man's shirt was on the floor, their bodies, far too close, their voices, far too soft, and in that moment, Marcus's entire world shattered. But he didn't scream, he didn't cry, he didn't storm in. He just quietly closed the door and made himself a promise: if he was going to be betrayed today, then the whole world would watch the truth unfold with him. And what he did next would shake the entire church to its core. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about a wedding gone wrong. It's about dignity, about rising when your heart is crushed beyond repair, and how one man lost everything, only to discover the kind of love that never lies. Marcus Hill was 33. A black architect with calloused hands and a calm soul. He didn't grow up with money, but he grew up with grit. He was raised in a group home in South Carolina, where hot meals and warm hugs weren't always guaranteed. But it was that scarcity that built him, one quiet hardship at a time. To Marcus, life was like architecture: you build it with care, with patience, with love, one brick at a time, even love itself. He met Chloe on a Sunday afternoon at a local outreach for the homeless. She was an art teacher, 29, soft-spoken, with loosely tied blonde hair and eyes the color of spring skies. Chloe wasn't someone who turned heads in a crowd. But the way she gently wiped an old man's hands, then quietly slipped a tissue into his coat pocket without a word, Marcus couldn't look away. They started talking. And from that moment on, conversation flowed between them like air. After just a few months, Marcus believed he'd found something real. Chloe was gentle, thoughtful, a good cook, loved animals. She brought peace to his world. A quiet kind of comfort that softened the edges of all the years he'd spent just trying to survive. With her, he felt seen, and more than that, loved for who he was. But just a few weeks before their wedding, something shifted. Chloe started forgetting things. She'd cry alone at night. One evening, in the middle of dinner, she suddenly put her fork down, sighed, and said she had to leave. Therapy session, she whispered. Marcus respected her space, but he started noticing a pattern. It was always Eli. A name she'd never mentioned before. He's helping me get grounded, Chloe explained when Marcus finally asked. I've been through some stuff. Eli's the only one who really understands. Marcus wasn't the jealous type. He believed everyone has their own shadows to work through. But the way she said Eli's name, something about it made him pause. She never shared where the sessions were, never invited him to go, and every time she mentioned her doctor, her eyes drifted, like she was somewhere else, somewhere Marcus couldn't reach. Once, he gently offered to go with her, just to show support, to be there for her. No, Chloe said firmly. Eli doesn't work with couples. That's his boundary, and I need a space where I can just be me. Marcus smiled. Outwardly, but inside, something cracked. Just a hairline fracture across what he thought was a flawless foundation. What he didn't know was that fracture, it was just the beginning. Marcus wasn't the suspicious type. He believed in conversation, in listening when something felt off. But sometimes, it's the silence that speaks the loudest. And the closer they got to the wedding, the more Chloe began to drift. She no longer lit up when they talked about invitations, the dinner menu, or their first dance. The loving gaze she used to give him was now just an empty stare. Sometimes she smiled, but her eyes didn't meet his. Sometimes she sat in complete silence, like her mind had wandered somewhere distant and unreachable. A place Marcus didn't have the map to. But what unsettled him most was the touch. Chloe used to be the one who reached for his hand first, who hugged him from behind while he worked, who'd gently tap his shoulder when he cracked a corny joke. Now. She pulled away. Every time he reached out to hold her, she gently stepped back. Every kiss he placed on her forehead felt met with hesitation, not warmth. One night, Marcus woke up around 2 a.m. The bed was cold beside him. He walked into the living room and found Chloe curled up on the couch, her face buried in her knees. She wasn't sobbing, but her whole body trembled. He knelt beside her. "Chloe, are you okay?" She startled, quickly wiped her face. I'm just stressed. Thinking about the past, that's all." "Is it about Illy?" Marcus asked, gently. Chloe looked away. "No, I just need to be alone right now." He nodded. He didn't want to push. But inside, questions were forming like cracks in a frozen lake. Who exactly was Illy? Marcus had only seen him once. Outside a session where Chloe was waiting. Tall, mid-30s, curly dark hair, confident smile, and eyes that didn't seem quite right. The handshake he gave Marcus. Too firm. Too long. And when he looked at Chloe, his gaze lingered. Just a second too long. Was it just in his head? One late afternoon, Marcus found the courage to ask. "Chloe, I know you trust Illy. But is there something going on between you two that I should know about?" She paused. Her face showed surprise, not anger. "He's like the father I never had, Marcus." The words were soft, but they landed in his chest like stone. "That's all?" he asked. "That's all? What are you thinking?" Marcus exhaled, shook his head slightly. "Nothing. I want to understand. You're not yourself lately." Chloe stood, leaned in, and kissed his cheek. "Don't worry, every bride gets a little overwhelmed before the big day. I just need time. Illy is just emotional support, nothing more." Marcus smiled, but deep down, that smile had lost a little of its faith. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. He didn't have proof, but he had a feeling. And his gut had never lied to him before. The night before the wedding, Savannah was unusually quiet. The streets were empty, and golden lamplight spilled across the pavement like fading memories. In his small apartment, Marcus was still wide awake. He was finishing a gift. Something he'd been working on for the past 3 months, in secret. A photo book. Not a printed one. A handcrafted scrapbook, made entirely by him. Each page marked a milestone in their love story, their first coffee date by the river. That long autumn hike through the woods. The rainy afternoon they read books together on the balcony. Marcus had printed the photos himself, added handwritten captions, even pressed in dried flowers. The same kind Chloe used to tuck between pages of her journals. He planned to give it to her the next morning, just before she walked down the aisle. But as he was sorting through backup photos on his laptop, choosing a cover image, he accidentally opened a folder. It was labeled Colorado Trip 2021, a folder he was certain he'd never seen before. Curious, he clicked. The images loaded slowly, one by one, and from the very first photo, Marcus felt his heart seize in his chest. Chloe, sitting on the wooden balcony of a forest cabin, smiling. Not the polite smile she'd worn lately, but a wide, radiant, carefree grin. Beside her was Illy Porter, not in a white coat, not with a notepad or therapy jargon, just Illy in a tight gray t-shirt, arm wrapped around her waist, eyes staring straight into the lens, like he had something to prove. Marcus didn't move. He kept scrolling. A shot under a waterfall. Illy carrying Chloe on his back, both of them laughing. Another in a rustic kitchen. Chloe cooking in one of LA's oversized shirts. And the last one, they were curled up together in a hammock, sharing a blanket. Faces close, eyes closed, smiles soft and easy. Marcus didn't know how long he sat there, still frozen. Then he checked the photo's timestamp, April 2021, 3 months before Chloe ever told him. She met Illy at therapy. 4 months before she and Marcus met at that charity event. And that line she'd once said, "He's like the father I never had," now cut through him like a jagged blade. He didn't yell, didn't smash the laptop, but his hand tightened around the spine of the scrapbook until the cover bent beneath the pressure. He looked down at the very first page, a picture of Chloe resting her head on his shoulder by the river. Underneath, in his own handwriting, it read, "Since you came into my life, I've stopped being afraid of the past." Now he understood. The past he thought was buried had never rested. It had simply been lying next to the woman he was about to marry, and its name was Illy Porter. The next morning, the sky over Savannah was strangely clear. Golden sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the church, casting soft reflections on the old patterned tiles. Guests had already begun to arrive. greeting each other with bright smiles and warm blessings. A soft piano melody floated from the sanctuary, blending with the gentle scent of white flowers. Marcus sat alone in the groom's waiting room. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his tie neatly knotted. But his eyes were empty, and his heart was still desperately trying to piece itself back together after the night before. He hadn't spoken to anyone. No confrontation with Chloe, no words to Ely. He kept it all inside, like a talent set to go off when no one would see it coming. In his hands was the scrapbook, still intact, still full of memories. But now, just a bitter keepsake. He no longer knew if the woman who would soon stand beside him at the altar truly loved him, or if she was just playing a beautiful role in someone else's story. His phone buzzed. A message from his mother. "I'm sitting front row. My son is going to be the happiest man alive today." Marcus swallowed hard. At that moment, someone from the wedding team burst into the room, breathless. "Mr. Marcus, I'm so sorry. Chloe's not in the bridal suite. She might be in the office behind the chapel." Marcus shot to his feet. His heart thundered. Not from wedding nerves, but from a very familiar gut feeling. Something terrible was about to happen. He strode quickly down the back hallway. His grip tightened around the scrapbook. Sweat beaded on his palm despite the room's air conditioning. He stopped outside the office door. From inside, he heard whispers. Chloe's voice, then a low chuckle, smooth and unmistakable. "Ely." Marcus raised a hand to knock. But for some reason, he pushed the door open instead. It wasn't locked. The door creaked slowly ajar, and what he saw on the other side was every groom's nightmare come to life. Chloe, still in her pristine white dress, slightly hunched over, her face streaked with tears, but her gaze soft and focused was fixed on Ely. Ely stood close beside her, shirtless. His white button, down draped over the back of a chair. One arm was gently wrapped around Chloe's waist, their heads bowed close together, sharing something. Something intimate. They both jolted when they saw Marcus. A silence more deafening than any scream filled the room. Chloe spoke first, her voice cracking. "Marcus, it's not what it looks like." He didn't reply. His eyes were locked on Ely. The same man he'd just learned was Chloe's ex, and now, still here, still touching her, on the morning of their wedding. Without a word, Marcus turned away. He closed the door softly, as if afraid even the wind might shatter what was already broken. The scrapbook hung limp in his hand. His eyes stared into some distant place, like a man walking through a dream he couldn't wake from. And in the hollow chamber of his chest, one truth echoed loud and clear. "If you were going to betray me today, then at the very least, let the whole world witness it." Marcus walked out of that room like a ghost. The hallway behind the church suddenly felt cold, despite the bright sun outside. He passed rows of stained glass windows, angelic figures glowing in color, but he saw none of it. All that filled his mind was blankness and one question repeating over and over. Why? Back in the groom's room, Marcus sat down, elbows on his knees. He didn't know how long he stayed like that. The music from the main sanctuary, the prelude, the MC inviting guests to take their seats, children laughing, it all felt like it belonged to a different world. And then the door opened. It was Chloe. She walked in sheepishly, her eyes red and puffy. The wedding dress still looked perfect on her, but that perfection now felt like a mask ready to shatter. "Marcus," she began softly, "I'm sorry for what you saw. I know it looked bad. But I swear nothing happened with Ely." Marcus said nothing. She took a step closer, her voice trembling. "He just came to comfort me. I panicked. Right before the ceremony, my heart was racing. I didn't know if I was ready. I needed someone who understood me." Marcus looked up at her, quietly. "Understood you?" His voice was rough. "So you turned to the man who once held you in those pictures from Colorado?" Chloe froze. A flicker of panic crossed her face. He continued, "I saw the photos. All of them. You said he was your therapist. But what was he really, Chloe? An ex? A backup plan? Or just someone you never truly let go of?" Chloe's breath hitched. I didn't know yous in the past. Ely and I. Yes, we were together once. But it ended before I met you. I swear. Marcus gave a short, bitter laugh. "You still see him. You hid it from me. The night before our wedding, you chose him over the man you were supposed to marry. And now you stand here, in a white dress, saying it's not what it looks like." Chloe fell silent. Her face drained of color. Marcus stood. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. But his eyes were colder than any scream. "I'm not canceling this wedding, Chloe," he said slowly. "I'm walking down that aisle like nothing happened, and so are you." Chloe stammered, "You're going to?" Marcus met her eyes, his voice steady as stone. "You lied to my face. But you won't lie to theirs. Today, everyone will know the truth. You want to play games? Then I'll end it, right in front of all the people clapping for us." Chloe broke into tears. She dropped to her knees, clinging to his leg. "Marcus, please don't, I love you. I really do." He looked down at her. For a moment, his heart wavered, but then, like a crack too deep to ever mend, he gently pulled her hands away. "You love me," he echoed softly. "Then why were your tearful eyes looking at a man who wasn't me?" He turned. The door to the groom's room creaked open. And this time, he walked out with a plan, not to say, "I do," but to expose a performance. Right in front of everyone who once believed they were the perfect couple. The church doors swung open, and Marcus stepped inside. Every eye turned toward him. His black tuxedo was sharp, his steps steady. Composed, as if nothing unusual had just happened. No one knew his heart had been torn apart just minutes earlier by a truth that burned. Marcus didn't look left or right. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He simply walked down the aisle. Silent and calm, until he reached home the sanctuary, and took his seat by the altar, where the groom was supposed to wait. A hush of whispers began to ripple through the pews. "He seems off today. Why does he look so tense? Maybe it's just wedding jitters." But it wasn't nerves. It was the silence before an earthquake. Moments later, the music changed, the back doors open again. Chloe appeared, arm in arm with her father, her face lit with a careful smile. She looked like a dream, radiant in her white gown, hair pulled back neatly, holding a bouquet of pure white roses. Guests gasped softly. One woman clutched her chest and whispered, "Whoa." But Marcus never turned around. Not once. Chloe reached his side and leaned in, whispering, "I'm here." Marcus gave the slightest nod. The officiant began the ceremony, his voice warm and echoing through the reverent space. "We are gathered here today to witness the sacred union of Marcus Hill and Chloe Ray." But just as he reached the vows, Marcus raised his hand. "Excuse me," he said quietly. The room froze. The officiant paused, puzzled. "Yes, Marcus." Marcus rose, adjusted his jacket, and stepped forward. He extended a hand toward the mic. Murmurs stirred. Chloe's brow furrowed. Her lips began to tremble. Marcus turned to face the crowd. He looked around slowly. His mother sat proudly in the front row, her smile glowing. His best friend Jared held his wife's hand, waiting for vows of love. And then Marcus spoke. "I know this is the part where I'm supposed to make promises for life. But instead, I have a gift. Not for Chloe, but for everyone here who believes they're witnessing a real love story." He turned toward the AV team holding the camera and soundboard. "Is the video ready?" A staff member nodded. "Play it," Marcus said calmly. Whispers died. A low hum filled the air. And then Chloe's voice, clear as glass, and sharp as a blade. "I know Marcus is a good man, but Ely makes me feel alive. I don't feel anything when Marcus touches me." Silence gripped the church like frost. Then more words followed. "I'm marrying him because he's stable, but I love Eli, I always have." A few audible sobs. Someone stifled a cry. Chloe stood frozen, trembling. Her face pale, her grip on the bouquet so tight her knuckles turned white. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Marcus never looked back. He calmly unclipped the mic from his lapel and placed it on the altar. Then he looked toward the front row. His mother now had her hand over her mouth. Jared had stood up on instinct, ready to rush forward. But no one moved. No one dared. Marcus took a deep breath and looked at Chloe, just once. "I wish you happiness," he said. "But not with me." And then he walked down the aisle, head high, eyes forward. Every step echoed in the hearts of the stunned crowd. And when the church doors closed behind him, someone finally wept. Not because a wedding was ruined, but because they had just watched a man who loved too deeply walk away for the last time. The grand doors of the church had barely closed behind Marcus when the entire sanctuary erupted. Some guests remained frozen, unable to process what they'd just heard. Others leaned into hushed murmurs, anxious, bewildered. But soon, the initial shock gave way to a ripple of rage, shame, and collective disappointment that spread like a jolt through the crowd. Marcus's mother stood up, clutching her chest, eyes glistening red. She didn't cry because she had lost a daughter-in-law. She cried because she had just watched her son be shattered in front of everyone. Jared, Marcus's best friend, took a step forward, fists clenched as if ready to destroy something, then exhaled slowly and gently helped Marcus's mother to her seat. Chloe was still standing, alone, on the altar, under 100 burning stairs, her wedding dress still pristine, the flowers still fragrant, but she stood like a statue. The microphone Marcus had used was still resting on the altar, untouched. No more applause, no more blessings. From the middle pew, a girl whispered to her mother. Did she lie to the groom, Mommy? The mother pulled her close, lowering her gaze to Chloe with quiet judgment, a stare heavy with both pity and contempt. An elderly aunt of Chloe's sighed aloud. I told you. The truth never stays hidden forever. From the far corner of the church, the officiant bowed his head. He didn't scold, didn't speak, but his eyes held a sorrow that could not be disguised. A sorrow for a love that once felt sacred. The bouquet slipped from Chloe's hand. She hadn't even noticed it fall. Her hands trembled by her sides. Her lips moved as if to form words. An apology, an explanation, or maybe just a desperate. It's not what it looks like. But no sound came out. Where was Ely? That question began to echo silently through the pews. He wasn't in the church. Not seated among the guests. Not behind the scenes. Just moments after Marcus walked out. Eli had quietly slipped through the side door, like a thief caught red-handed at a wedding he was never invited to. Chloe finally collapsed into a chair. For the first time that day, her tears didn't come from fear of being exposed, but from the brutal truth, she had lost everything. Her dignity, her love, and the respect of those who once cared for her. A flower girl ran to her side, wrapping tiny arms around her leg. Are you okay, Miss Chloe? Chloe didn't answer. She couldn't hear much of anything anymore. The world had turned to static. The abrupt silence of the music, the sound of a camera clattering to the floor, the soft swish of silk as guests slowly stood and made their quiet exit. A woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, I don't know whether to be angry or heartbroken for her. He replied low. She had everything, and still chose to lie. Outside, the wind picked up. A single golden leaf drifted across the church steps, landing precisely where Marcus had stood to say his final words. The once blue sky faded into a pale, cold gray. None of the guests would ever forget that day. Not because of the grand decorations, or the stunning wedding gown, but because they witnessed a man stand tall through heartbreak and speak the truth, when all he was given was a lie wrapped in white lace. After leaving the church, Marcus didn't go home. He didn't head to a hotel, or anywhere friends might be waiting. He just drove, nowhere in particular. The road ahead blurred through the tears he refused to let fall. Everything had gone according to plan. The string quartet played right on time. The dress arrived as ordered. Gold-trimmed chairs, ivory ribbons, embossed invitations bearing his and Chloe's names. Every detail perfect. Except the bride. Marcus pulled over on an empty road by the lake. He turned off the engine. Silence settled in. No honking horns. No cheers. No wedding music. Just him, and emptiness. He rested his forehead on the steering wheel and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt like a foster kid again. Abandoned, unchosen, without explanation. He'd lost his mother young, bounced through the system, learned to stand on his own in a world that rarely offered certainty. And he'd promised himself one day, I'll have a family. Someone to love me, someplace to belong, he thought. That person was Chloe. But today, the day he'd once dreamed of the most, had become the day he most wished to erase. Chloe's voice echoed in his mind like a curse. I love a lie. I've always loved Eli. Marcus clenched the wheel. His palms were slick with sweat. Images flooded his mind. Her smile next to Ely in those old photos. Their closeness behind the church door. Her panicked eyes when he walked in. Not out of remorse, but fear of getting caught. That wasn't love, it was a performance. And he'd been its most devoted audience. That day, Marcus didn't eat, didn't sleep. Just sat in his car, staring at the still water, a mirror of his own heart. Silent, empty, unseen. His phone buzzed dozens of times. Messages from his mother, Jared, coworkers, even journalists, all asking the same thing. Are you okay, Marcus? Is it true? We're worried about you. He didn't answer. He silenced the phone, locked the screen, and reclined the seat. He must have dozed off. When he woke up, it was dark. Streetlights cast dull amber streaks over the lake's surface. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a version of himself he barely recognized. Red, rimmed eyes, hollow cheeks, a man broken. Marcus got back to his apartment near midnight. He didn't turn on the lights. Didn't shower. Didn't change. He sat on the couch and placed the scrapbook on the table. The same book he once treated as a symbol of love's journey. Now just a reminder of his own foolish hope. And then, he cried. No more holding it in. No more pretending to be strong. Marcus Hill. The man who'd survived a childhood without parents, who stood tall in a ruined wedding before hundreds of guests, now wept like a child. He cried for the love that was lost, for the trust that had been shattered, and for himself. A man who had loved too deeply, too honestly. Too much. 3 weeks after the wedding fell apart, Savannah was still picture perfect, but to Marcus, every street, every familiar cafe, every corner of the city felt like a memory he no longer wanted to walk through. He wasn't himself anymore. Friends kept texting, his mom kept calling. Jared did everything he could to pull Marcus out of the shell he had locked himself in. But Marcus didn't answer. To anyone, he lived like a shadow, no work, no walks, no TV, no open curtains. His apartment, once warm with laughter and light, now sat in silence. The wedding bouquets were still there, wilting in the corner. The congratulatory cards were still piled in a basket, unopened. And the scrapbook still lay on the table, a cruel reminder of something he once believed was real. Then one morning, as sunlight slipped through the thin curtains and warmed his unshaven, hollow face, Marcus opened his eyes. And for the first time, he didn't feel tired from heartbreak, but from numbness. He stood up, walked to the window and opened it. The wind rushed in, and he knew. He had to leave this place. Leave everything that echoed of Chloe of Ali. Of the wedding that should have never happened. He didn't want pity. He didn't want the sympathetic stares. He needed something else, a reset. A beginning. A way back to himself. That afternoon, Marcus packed a few changes of clothes, his old camera, and his sketchbook. The one that reminded him why he once fell in love with architecture. He sent his mother a message. Just 4 words, I need some time. Then he got in his car and drove north. Marcus eventually stopped in a small town in Oregon. A place where no one knew his name. Where no one had read about the cancelled wedding of a black architect in Savannah. The only place with a vacancy was an old cabin by the woods, near a glassy lake. The landlord was a gentle old man who asked him only one question. Are you running from something, or to something? Marcus paused, then smiled. Both. In the days that followed, life became simple. He made coffee every morning, listened to the birds. Every afternoon, he'd walk to the lake and sketch wooden houses through the mist. He began teaching architecture online to kids through a remote learning platform. No classrooms. No prestige. Just a stable Wi-Fi connection, and a heart still willing to give. He met children from rural towns across the country. Some had lost parents, some dreamed of designing buildings but lacked the tools. In their eyes, he saw a younger version of himself. And from there, he began to believe again. Not in love. Not in others. But in something deeper, that he still had worth. That he still had something to give. And somewhere to grow. Marcus Hill was no longer the groom left broken at the altar. Now, he was a man by the lake, breathing deeply into the wind, and knowing that what's shattered may never be whole again, but it can be rebuilt. Stronger. And more honest. That afternoon was overcast, the kind of gray sky that whispered rain was coming. Marcus sat at the small corner cafe. The only place in town that served almond milk lattes and had halfway decent Wi-Fi. As always, he picked the seat by the window. In front of him sat a cooling cup of coffee. Next to it, his sketchbook, open to a half-finished drawing of a small house, simple, warm, but with a porch just big enough for a wooden swing. It wasn't a commission. Wasn't for a client. It was just for him. He was drawing the final diagonal lines when a sudden gust rattled the window panes. And then, the door opened. A woman stepped inside, cradling a yellow umbrella, hair pulled into a loose bun, raincoat darkened by drizzle, mud splattered lightly on her boots. She smiled at the barista, her voice soft and clear. Hot cocoa, please. Light on the sugar. Marcus hadn't planned to look up, but something in her voice made him glance over. Not because it was familiar, but because of how she smiled. Not too wide, not forced, just real. She scanned the cafe and her eyes stopped at his table. Excuse me, she said gently. That table's catching too much draft. Would you mind? Is hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Of course. She sat down, removing her hood. Dark hair tied back. Deep brown eyes, calm, observant. No heavy makeup. No searching gaze, the ones he'd grown used to on awkward first dates. They sat quietly for a few minutes. Marcus kept sketching. She pulled a worn paperback from her bag, a classic novel, spine creased with time. Then she spoke. "You're an architect, aren't you?" Marcus looked up, surprised. She nodded toward his sketch. "I studied fine arts. You can tell from the way you draw lines, how you frame space." He chuckled. The first time he'd laughed in weeks. "I used to be an architect." "Used to," she tilted her head. "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "Now I just teach kids how to draw, online." She smiled. "So you don't just build houses, you help others build dreams." It was a simple line, but Marcus fell silent. Not because she complimented him, but because it had been so long since anyone saw him like that. Not as someone broken. Not as a man whose wedding went viral for all the wrong reasons. But as someone, still worth something. "And you?" he asked. "I'm Caroline," she replied, a soft grin tugging at her lips. "I work for a community program. I teach reading to kids in rural areas, and I write letters, real ones, to elderly folks who live alone." Marcus looked at her again. Longer, this time, not because she was beautiful, but because she wasn't trying to understand him. She was just there. Fully present. No pity, no effort to fix anything. Just there. They didn't talk much, but it was enough. Enough that when Marcus returned to his cabin that night, he found himself wondering. For the first time since everything, why do I feel at peace? Their next meetings happened naturally. As if neither of them had planned a thing. Marcus and Caroline started bumping into each other at that little cafe, then slowly began texting ahead of time. Then gradually found themselves walking the lake trail together on quiet weekends. No one brought up the past. No one asked about old wounds unless the other was ready. They were just there. Like the warm light at the end of a gray day. Like the scent of rain still lingering in the air. Like all those quiet things that aren't flashy, but somehow, still hold your heart. One afternoon, as they sat by the lake in silence, Caroline turned to him and asked, "Have you ever been hurt so deeply, you stopped believing in love?" Marcus didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. "Yeah," he said. "To the point where I thought I'd never enough to feel it again." Caroline pressed her lips together, then gave a soft nod. And after a pause, she said, barely above a whisper, "Me too." They didn't dig further. But somehow, that quiet confession was enough. Enough to understand that whatever had happened in their separate stories, they'd met each other at the same chapter, not where love looked rosy, but where love still felt worth reaching for. That day, Marcus didn't sketch a house. He drew a lakeside bench. Two figures sat side by side, one smiling, the other still, but both facing the setting sun. Time passed, and one cool October evening, Marcus invited Caroline to his cabin. No flowers, no candles. Just a simple dinner, spaghetti and veggie salad. After they ate, Marcus opened a drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was the scrapbook. Caroline looked up, surprised. "This is..." "It was a gift," Marcus said. "For someone else, once. But tonight, I'm not showing you this to talk about the past. I just want you to see that even from what's broken, something new can begin." He opened to the first page. It was a drawing, a lakeside cabin, complete with soft light in the windows, and two chairs on the porch. Beneath the sketch, handwritten words read, "True love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be honest, and gentle enough not to scare someone away." Caroline didn't say anything. She simply reached out and took his hand, and in that moment, Marcus understood something he hadn't until now. Chloe had been a beautiful dream. Meant for the wrong person. But Caroline, she hadn't stormed into his life like some cinematic whirlwind. She came like a blanket in winter, quiet, steady, warm enough to make him stop shivering. Maybe Marcus would never love the way he did the first time. But he was loving again, in a new way. A way that wasn't rushed. Wasn't performative, just two broken people. Choosing to stay. Not for the past. Not even for the promise of forever. But for a present moment that felt real. And sometimes, that alone is a miracle.